very excited to see so many familiar names in my Zoom panel, as well as new names coming up. Gratitude to all of you for joining us in this journey. Last weekend, we had a session on what is the role of power and perseverance in remaining motivated. And this week, we are grateful to have Shiv Kumar, who will be taking a very interesting session on Indian culture for millennials. Shiva Kumar, an engineer who turned to computer-aided design during his brief career in the industrial world, realized early that there is a spiritual dimension that had depths and meaning to all aspects of the life. Since 2001, he has been part of Oro Youth, a youth initiative of Sri Aurobindo Society, and has been involved with its youth-related programs. Over to you, Shikumar.
Thank you, Rishi, and namaste, and good evening to every one of you. Today is a very special day simply because just yesterday we celebrated our 74th Independence Day. And it also tells us that as a nation, we are 74 years old. Now, when we look at our nation and look at its past history, somewhere we get the feeling that no, it is not just 74 years is our real age, but somewhere in our heart, we have this feeling that we had existed much longer than these 74 years. And in fact, when I was studying in my college, and I think I was studying the engineering college last year, somewhere around that time, I suddenly got an idea that this country of which I am part of is something special, because that is the age when we open up to larger ideas. Well, until that, it is me and myself, and how do I get the best out of it, how to enjoy a few things, and these were the ideas. But as we grow up, somewhere probably when we reach college, our head opens up to larger and greater ideals. And that was one of the first times I felt that I am part of something bigger, because that is the age where we are looking for our own identities. And who am I? What am I? Where do I belong to? And these were the search which led me to perhaps a notion that I am part of something bigger and what they call as India. And maybe this India that I see right now is not the India, but there is a lot of secrets buried into it. I have to dig up and then come to know about it. And this is one of the first quests which I had started my college days, the last year of my college. And in those times, of course, when I was looking to understand what my country is, whatever I could understand from the history books which I have gone through in my school as well as in college, well, they gave a lot of data. And I'm just going to share with you something of that, and then we will proceed further as. So Rishi, could you give me a thumbs up if you can see the screen? All right. One of the first things which I came across while I was searching for my identity as an Indian is here is a nation. Well, in those days, probably it was approaching around 50 years or so. And it is a very young nation, and it had a geographical identity, and we had a constitution, and we were told that following that constitution is what makes us into an Indian. And of course, right now we had 1.3 billion of Indians. And are we all speaking the same language? And well, the interesting thing is, even though we had 22 scheduled languages, actually there were 1,369 mother tongues, which means that, and that is just a mother tongue, which means a language like Tamil will be a mother tongue. For me, I grew up in Tamil Nadu, so for me, my mother tongue is Tamil. But even in Tamil, there are different dialects, because if you happen to be growing up in Chennai, and if you come somewhere to the south, you'll find that a different type of Tamil, a different dialect of Tamil is being spoken. And how many dialects are spoken all over this geographical entity called India? Well, close to 20,000. And unlike any other nation in the world, which all had one language for them, you take up any country and there is one language which is primarily spoken. Well, we had at least 20,000 dialects spoken. We had no national language, and Hindi is the official language of government. Well, all the people in north part of India are happy about it because it is a language which they can understand. Come to South India, and then for the first time you understand that, well, Hindi is not going to have a go here. And then you understand that the language that is being spoken is very different. Your first encounter of any of the South Indian languages, especially if you are coming from north of India, will be one of a surprise. And you'll be asking, what language is this? Not able to. Every 50 kilometers that you travel in this country, you will encounter a different dialect, a different set of foods, different way of dressing up. Well, in Kerala, if you go to Kerala, they will be dressing up in one way. In Tamil Nadu, in one way. If you go to Gujarat, they will even wear the sari in the opposite way. And if you go to the Pahadi areas, well, there the dress culture is totally different. Every 50 kilometers, something or the other is different, and you are hardly able to find anything which can unite all of us, so that we can all say proudly that we belong to that single nation, and that nation is India. And interestingly, what we call as India is only a name given to a political entity with certain geography fixed. And even that in 1947, when it happened, well, we assumed an identity, not a complete identity, but a broken identity, because we were not one single nation which got liberation from the Britishers, but eventually we broke into two. We became India and Pakistan. And if you look at the name itself, India, is it the name that we have given to ourselves? Just imagine that you are living in your house, and you are the head of that house. The house has a name. And that name should be something which is decided by the people who live in that house? Or do you think somebody else, a visitor who occasionally visited and stayed in our home as a guest, and when he wanted to leave this country, he left it by giving us a name? Would it be okay and acceptable to us to be named by people who are outside of our nation? And that is what exactly has happened. The name India itself is a name which is derived from the word Indus. It simply meant that a group of people living on one side of the river Indus were used to be called as Indians by the people on the other side of the river, and they never even bothered to ask ourselves, did we have a name, and what would we like to be called? And in a certain sense, the very name that we proudly say itself is a name given by somebody else. You have to really dig deep, go a lot backwards in time before you understood that there was an entity which went by the name Bharatavarsha, and its geographical boundaries are even well defined. And this was the land which was ruled by a king and Bharat, and therefore the country which we know of were spoken of by those people living within this place. They always used to refer to it as Bharatavarsha, and this is in fact recognized even in the constitution. So even the Constitution of India did not want to accept the name India because it is given by somebody else. It's not a name which we have named it ourselves, and therefore in the constitution it says India, that is Bharat. And what is this India, and what higher ideals do they follow? Well, this land, was identified and given the name India, or even if we go a little backwards in time, perhaps at least 8-9 centuries back, well, we were even called as Hindustan. And why are we called Hindustan? Because these are the people who follow a peculiar set of customs which were named as Hindus, because that name, the Indus, when it got translated into common man's parlance, Indus was a little too difficult to pronounce, so Hindu was easier to pronounce, H got added, and therefore we came to be labeled as Hindus. What does it mean? What is the religion that the higher ideals that this group of people followed? Well, nobody could say, because there was no one book. There is no one single authoritative book like a Bible or a Quran, which will say that these are the customs, these are the ideals this group of people will follow. There was no one single book. But if the book is not there, at least there is somebody who perhaps founded this lifestyle, and maybe we can go and ask him. So when you look back in this place, you don't find any one single founder of the higher ideals that were followed by the people of this Bharat, that is India. So here is a peculiar set of people, and we have to understand the peculiarity, because behind that peculiarity is the beauty and brilliance. But still, what appeals to us for the first glance is this peculiarity. A group of people primarily following a religion, no founder, and they don't have one single book. Well, they don't have one single God whom they are going to invoke, because it is said that at least this group of people are following 33 crore of gods are there. Anywhere you go to India, any small village, you will find one god put up and people are worshiping that god. And this is such a crazy country. And this is the country into which some of you who are called the millennials, and what Wikipedia says as millennials is the people who are born just before the year 2000, who are born with a certain things wired into their brain, and unfortunately this wiring doesn't allow us to accept lot of things which goes by the name of this religion, Hinduism, or lot of things that are being practiced in this country, India, because all that we come across is there is this caste system which divides people and separates people. There is no one God, and therefore too many gods are there, and then we have difference of opinion, and there is no one single path which leads us to our ideal, and so many ideals are there. This is what appears to us in the first look. But if you go a little deeper, and what I find is something amazing, because in my family, I was living in Tamil Nadu for several years, and in my family, interestingly, we are 4 brothers and sisters, and there is father and mother, and all the 6 of us were following different gods in one single house. So my favorite was Lord Karthikeyan. We call him in Tamil as Muruga, not the Muruga of Hindi, but Muruga of Tamil word, Lord Karthikeyan. And well, my sister followed another, her Ishta, the one who is close to her heart. She had the freedom to choose. And my father can choose what he wanted to. My mother can choose the God that she wanted to. And it is amazing that in one single household, everybody can choose their own favorite goddess, and yet we were a united family. We never used to fight over gods, because somewhere intuitively, inwardly, we knew that this difference is necessary because we are different people. If we have robots of the same configuration, well, we can follow the same software and operating system with a definite pattern, but we are not robots. We are not created in the same mold, and therefore we needed a different path, a different Godhead, different set of ideals. And yet, if that were the only thing, then all of us, being so different, will be fighting with each other, and that was not the case. which made me question that even if we are so different, we cannot agree on anything. We don't eat the same food, we don't wear the same dress, we don't speak the same language. Then how are we able to say that we are one nation? And in order to understand that, what appeared to me as chaos, a confusion, was in a certain sense, when I started reading Sri Aurobindo, I came to understand that it is the beauty of the Indian culture, because the diversity that we see is only for the first appearance, and it existed and it could exist only on the basis of something which unites all of them, and unites them so strongly that even if we have 33 crores, somewhere when we go deep enough, we can say that all this is an expression of one single God. There is only one. If we want to call it as a truth or God or the divine, whatever you want to call it, there is only one truth which we have to discover. Only because we are so very different, we are approaching it from so many different angles and viewpoints, and for our own convenience, we can name it differently, but the truth is one. And where do we find this? Well, it is not found in our history books, in our classrooms, but we have to go back to the most ancient book which we had, and the name that was given to it was the Vedas. And there it said very clearly that Ekam Sat, the truth, the real, the thing that needs to be found is one. Viprah Bahudha Vadanti. People name it variously according to their language, according to their inclination, and according to their desire. They can name it, but it is one truth. And this one truth, this unity, is the binding factor for all the diversity that we see. And that gave rise to a question: what is that one truth? What is that one thing which will help me to understand my country? And this was the quest I carried. And I carried it for several years, because whether it was in my school or in outside, I did not have any of the books that can tell me about this one truth which I have to discover, which will help me to understand my country, which will also help me to understand my role in the betterment, in the beautiful future of my country. And that quest led me to Sri Aurobindo. And when I started reading some of the things that Sri Aurobindo had said about our country, one of the quotes which struck me very beautifully is that where he says, and it is the quote that you see on the screen, well, the speciality, the uniqueness of this country, and this is what Sri Aurobindo says, well, God, the divine, whoever is behind the entire creation, he always keeps for himself a chosen country in which the higher knowledge is, through all chances and dangers, by the few or the many, continually preserved. Now I was asking, where is it being preserved? And that was when I understood that in our educational system, perhaps the books which used to reveal this higher knowledge, which used to tell us the truth is one, but you can approach it in from so many different viewpoints, and that truth was not made available to me. And not only that, how do I experience the truth was also not made available through the textbooks through which I grew in my education. And yet it is being preserved, and we need to go dig a little deeper, and then it becomes evident for us. Continually preserved, and for the present, in this Chaturyuga at least, that country, the chosen country, is India. But I have to tell you, from what I could see around me about this country, did not give me any clue, and which will say that this is a chosen country, because all that I came through the history of this country through the history books is what minerals grew where, and then what type of specialty in this state, which king was fighting with the other king, and all these things, but nothing of the higher knowledge was ever mentioned in the textbooks which I had gone through, which made me to go to those textbooks which were removed from the education, which could reveal to me the higher knowledge. And that was the quest which actually finally made me question, what is this country? Is this country only what we see? If only what we see could be called as India, it is chaos. There's no one language, there's no one religion even, there's no one lifestyle, there's no one founder of this. There are so many things which are in conflict with each other, that if I have to call only what I see as India, that is not okay for me. And that was when I came across this quote by the mother, and here is a deep truth that she reveals, and this is it. India, what is it? India, that is Bharat. And this is what the mother says, because the mother is from the Sri Aurobindo ashram of Pondicherry, and she had this capacity to go to look deep into things, and she could come up with the truth of things. And out of her capacity to do so, this is what she has shared with us. India is not the earth. Well, it is not something which is defined by the geography with its rivers and mountains of this land. Well, that is not it. Then what is it? Neither is it a collective name for the inhabitants of this country. 1.3 billions are there. So if only these people constitute India, well, I would say that the future of India looks very bleak, the way things are moving now. And in spite of a few little sparks of goodness that is happening, by and large, look at how we are as a nation. Well, in that way, look at how this earth itself is as a collection of humanity. And then she says, and this is what struck me most, India is a living being, as much living as, say, Shiva. Mother is talking about two things. Well, two things. We might have thought that, well, Shiva, Vishnu, they are all, they come in Puranas, they are mythical, they are all in stories, and they are not real. So she scores 2 points with a single stroke. One, India is a living being, as much living as Shiva. And this Godhead, Shiva, that she is speaking out, is as living as India. Now, both are the simultaneous truth. And then she says something beautiful. India, which is a power, which is a Shakti, and which is what we call as Bharat Mata. It's a living being, it's a person. And finally, she says, if she likes, she can manifest in human form. And that is it. It is this person who has become this land, who has become this culture, who has become this tradition, and it, without connecting to this person, Bharat Mata, we will not be actually be able to connect with anything of deeper value in what we see around us. And this was one question which came immediately me. If India is a living person, then how do I get in touch with this person so that I can understand more of what India is? And this is one of the questions which is asked by a disciple to the mother, because the disciple asked, the disciple mentioned something which the mother herself has said, and he is asking a question. So the disciple asked, you have said in one of your messages, the number one problem for India is to find back and manifest her soul. Now, what is this soul which he is talking about? See, if the mother says India is a person like God Shiva or like you and me, and what do we have? When we look at ourselves, and we can clearly distinguish that at least there are 3 types of parts within us through which we actually live our life. Well, one of the first thing is we have a mind, an intellect, which can think logically, and then of course each one has their own logic, but still it can think and then it can express the thoughts, and anything related to the thoughts that occur to me constitute my mind. So as a person, if I look at myself, I have a mind which thinks about everything in the universe. And secondly, I have a heart, not a physical heart, but a place where emotions play around. I have happiness and sadness and jealousy and compassion and love. Innumerable emotions play around in my heart, and it is the place of emotions. I have a part which I can call as emotion. And then when I look at myself, I have a life energy which fills my body, because of which all the functions in my body happens. And the digestion happens, the distribution happens, all that happens in a body. So I have a physical part, a body. I have a life energy which goes through the physical part. I have an emotional part, and I have a mental part. And if we go back to what we covered in our previous session, relationship with the divine, we also found that this is not all that I am. This we can say for every one of us. There is a fourth, deeper part, deep within my heart, and we saw that it has been named by the mother as a psychic being, or the soul of India. So this is what constitutes a person. I have a body with life energy, I have emotions, and I have mind with something deeper, the mysterious part, the part which has such a tremendous possibility and potentiality that in a certain sense I can say that my life is meant to make this potentiality which is deep within my heart into a reality. And this is why I have taken birth in the same way. If India is a person, well, she has a physical body, and what you see geographically, physically, is her body with the people living in it, with the landmass, with its rivers and mountains. It's nothing but its physical part. Through it, the life energy which runs through her physical part, which keeps manifesting in such a diverse traditions in different types of food, different type of dresses, different type of art. And this is the second one. A third one is the emotional part of India, which has expressed itself in Indian art and Indian music and Indian dance and Indian drama. Everything that have emotional content in it, well, they constitute the heart, the emotion, the emotional part of India. And then, well, there are so many people who have expressed some noble thoughts which we can go through and we can discover in books, as well as we can connect directly to that thought current. And the best thought of India all come from the mental part, the intellectual part of India. But behind it all, what does India trying to achieve through all these? Well, that secret message, the destiny of who we are meant to be as a nation, has not to be found if you look only at the physical part. You cannot find it only if you look at the life current of India, nor can you discover this destiny if you look at only the art and music and dance and drama, nor can you figure it out if you go through the best thoughts that India has produced. And it is available only in that part of India which you can call only as India's soul. And therefore my question was, how do I get in touch with the soul of India? And I was living this question day in and out, and until I got to the answer from the mother. And this is what we are going to see now, because what mother has said, the number one problem for India is to find back and manifest her soul. And as long as we don't do it, we cannot solve the problems that we as a nation are facing. And therefore, the disciple expressed my own question, how to find this India's soul. And then the mother gave an important clue. She said, just in one sentence, become conscious of your psychic being. What is the psychic being? It is that part deep within our heart, which we saw in our previous session, relationship with this divine, that when we get connected to it, immense possibilities open up, newer faculties also open up. In fact, if you have to put in one sentence what is the inherent characteristic of this part, and that one sentence will be that this part is capable of reaching out to everything around it in an intuitive way. Now, we have to understand what this word intuition is, but before we get an idea of what this intuitive way of reaching out to things around us means, let us finish the quote. The mother says, become conscious of your psychic being. Let your psychic being become intensely interested in India's soul and aspire towards it with an attitude of service. And if you are sincere, you will succeed. Now, we have to ask ourselves, if we have to get connected with the soul of India, we have to get connected with our own soul. When we get connected with our own soul, I will have to remind you of what we covered in our previous session. New way of seeing and relating with people, and not only people, everything, even the object around us, a new way gets developed for us. We did not name it last time, but we will be naming it. This secret part in us is actually an intuitive self. And how does it feel when we get connected with it? And this is the quote that we saw. I will be quickly going through it so that we can take it further. So when we are in touch with this deepest part within us, what we feel is suddenly we feel that we are living in all things and all beings around us. The barriers separating individuals from each other, it breaks down. We can actually think in their thoughts, vibrate in their sensation, because we are intuitively connected. Now we get the meaning of intuition. What does the word intuition mean? Well, it is a capacity to identify with something in such a way that with such depth and such totality that we become that thing. And therefore, if we come across a person and if we intuitively connect that person with that person, we become that person in this sense that we can understand the thoughts which are going through that person, the sensations, the feelings, and the very life of that person. And also, because we are reaching out to that person through this soul, we get connected with the soul of the other person through, in fact, we even understand what that person is meant to be. And therefore, if we connect with everybody around us in this intuitive way, we could understand that what is the best which everyone around us is supposed to express, to become. And if that is so, then it is so much easier to focus ourselves on drawing out the best from each one of us. But this is only about the people around us. Next, what happens to objects, to things of nature around us when we are in touch with the soul? The mother says, what seemed inert suddenly becomes full of life. Even stones quicken. So even if you pick up a stone, and it has to be an Indian stone, and if we pick up a stone, we have an instant connection with it, that we feel the vibration and the liveliness of the soul, which is the spark of the soul, which is even inside the stones, the presence of something of which we can name only as a divine and presence which is there in the stones. And if we can get connected with it, the stone is not a stone anymore. It is something which is very alive and vibrating. And the same is the feelings that we have when we step out and we encounter plants. And these plants, what they feel, what they will, and what they suffer, in this sense, what they go through, becomes evident to us because we could identify, because when we are connected with the soul, we gain the capacity to intuitively identify with things, and not only with plants, even animals speak in a language more or less inarticulate but clear and expressive. Everything around us is animated by a marvelous consciousness without time or limit. And this is the feeling of intuition that we come. When we get connected with it and when we start living our life, what will be the nature, the quality of the life that we can conceive of? In order to understand that, I'm here to share with you at least a couple of stories as the time permits, which will give us an idea what it means to be in touch with our soul, through it to be in touch with the soul of India, and then to express ourselves. Now, one of the first story which I wanted to share with you happened with one French person who happened to come to India, and especially to the Sri Aurobindo Ashram. His name was Sat Prem. He has heard of the Sri Aurobindo Ashram and a kind of a unique lifestyle which is being attempted there, and therefore he was on his way to it. And while he was into India, he was roaming here and there in India, and it so happened that he did not have too much money, so he was almost like a wandering monk type of a person. As he was going through, he happened to cross through a jungle, and as he crossed the jungle, it was one of the bigger jungles, and by the time he has crossed it, he couldn't get proper food. As he was crossing the jungle, he was thirsty, he was hungry, he was tired, and the day was approaching its end. The night has almost set in, and this was a time when he stepped out of the jungle and entered into a village, a very small village, and one or two thatched roofs here and there. So he, being very hungry, he somehow dragged himself up to a one thatched roof, and then he knocked at the door. And when the door opened, so one lady of the house, very poor lady, because it was a thatched house, it was not even an RCC or a properly built house, and she looked at him and then she said something which he couldn't understand. He is coming from French, he couldn't understand any of the Indian languages, but one look at him, the lady of the house understood, this fellow is hungry, he is tired, he needs a place to crash, and that is why he has knocked at my door, the door of my house. And then she immediately asked him to come inside. And when Sat Prem stepped inside the house, well, the house did not have many rooms. There's only one room with some temporary partitions that was there. And then when he entered into, the lady went inside the house, and then she brought a little bit of rice and one sabji, but barely, it was not mixed vegetable sabji, but one sabji somehow being cooked by her, and he ate it, and then he went to sleep, and then he had the best sleep. And when he woke up in the morning, that was the time when he started looking around, and then he saw that he has taken in the hospitality of a very, very poor house. And he could immediately even feel, when he looked at one corner, which was supposed to be a kitchen, there was hardly anything to eat. And he understood that from whatever little food these people had, the lady of the house, she has given it, all of it, to him. And then he looked at another corner, there was one small partition, and another old lady, probably the mother of the leader of the house, and probably she is there, and all she had is one mat, and she was lying down in that mat. And then he understood that what he received was an immeasurable amount of hospitality. He just wanted to give them something, because these are the people, even though they had very little food, they have so generously shared. So he had a very old torn bag. He was not a man of riches. So he looked and he was searching for something which he can give to these people, and suddenly he came across one small stone. And then suddenly he remembered when he was walking by the river Ganga, the Ganges, and there he wanted to feel the waters of Ganga. And then when he stepped into Ganga, he had a beautiful connection and contact with Ganga. He wanted to remember it, and therefore he picked up a stone which was lying inside the river, and he had kept it in his that torn bag. Fortunately, it had stayed in that bag all this while, and he found that he had nothing else to give. So he took out that stone and he looked around. He saw that old lady. So he went up to that old lady and he wanted to give this precious stone. It's precious for him. But how can he say anything to this old lady? He doesn't know the language. So he just caught hold of this old lady's hand, kept the stone on her hand, and just told her that this is from Ganga. Ganga, that's it. And the lady immediately understood, oh, the stone is from Ganga. And what did she do? She immediately turned around. Well, in one, right where when she was lying down, there was a picture of a god, and there was a ad hoc puja place. Probably that is a place where everyday worship in that house used to happen. She immediately went to that place. She took up one small clean patram, a small vessel, kept this small stone in front of the Lord's picture, and immediately prostrated in front of it. And that simple act stirred Satprem very deeply, and he was amazed because what he saw was not a superstitious belief of an old lady, very uneducated, of course, one could see that, but what he saw that even in this uneducated lady, what she could see in that stone was not a finite, lifeless stone, but she was seeing the presence of an infinite force, and to that infinite force, she had the sensitivity to recognize it, she had the capacity to connect with it, and out of that connection, an adoration came out of that lady, and therefore she kept that stone and she prostrated right in front of it. And one stroke of thought went through Satprem's mind, and this is how it translated, wow, this lady can see infinity even in finite things. Now, what an amazing thing. He said, is this a country where people can see infinity in finite things? And that was one of the characteristics of the essence of India. There are innumerable things which are available in bits and pieces, but they are all connected by something which is of the nature of an infinite presence, which is running through all that we see as broken up pieces. And that was one expression. But where did that expression came from? Even that uneducated lady could connect herself with the deepest part in herself, and through which she had developed this capacity of seeing infinity in finite things. And when we, with that sense, as the mother said in that previous quote, when we look at the sky, we not only see the sky, but we see the sky as an expression of an infinite force behind it. And when we see the 33 crore gods, we are not seeing them as different gods, but in and through those gods, we are looking at an infinite power, which has taken various names and form, and that is in a certain sense the characteristic of India. And this is not something which we come across and which we can learn from history books. This part of India, this in fact the idea of what India is becomes apparent to us only when we get in touch with our own soul, and it opens up a dimension. And we really have to understand the expressions of India, which were a result of people getting connected with this part deep within us. And I'm going to share with you one more story. I've just made a list of these stories which you can look up and then probably come across to understand India, not through history textbooks, but through the soul of India. And that story is the story of Tansen. Well, I hope all of you know who Tansen is. One of the greatest musicians who was part of Akbar's court. And Akbar was a time where he was very fond of Tansen. And also, who was Tansen? master musician. What is his specialty? Well, when he starts singing, people can forget about everything else and then become immersed in music. And that was Tansen's specialty. So when every time Akbar used to have one of Tansen's performance in his court, he will always say, Tansen, at the end of the concert, he will say, Tansen, you are the best. There is nobody else who can sing better than you. And every time Akbar will say this, Tansen will say, he will bow down and say, no, my lord, that's not true. So Akbar said, this person is so humble that that is what he is saying. But every time he said, Tansen, you're the best, Tansen said that, no, my lord, I'm not the best. At one point, Akbar got a little irritated. Hey, I'm giving you a compliment and show me who can sing better than you and why don't you accept it? So at one point, he caught hold of Tansen and told him, Tansen, why do you say that? And you are the best. Is there anybody who can sing better than you in this country? And then Tansen said that, yes, my lord, my guru, the one who taught me music, he can sing better than what I can sing. And does anybody know who is the guru of Tansen? Well, we are talking about one of the greatest musicians. And do we know?
Haridas.
Haridas, excellent. Swami Haridas Giri. And he is, not many of us know, because why he says, we know the people who are popular, but we do not know the source which made these people popular. And actually, I can actually show you some of the popular people from contemporary India and then what they have to say. So this, when Tansen said that Swami Haridas Giri, my guru, can sing, Akbar was not ready to accept. How can anybody sing better than Tansen? He said, okay, Tansen, if you say so, invite Swami Haridas Giri with all the special things. Call him to my courtyard so that we can have his concert. Then actually we will come to know whether he is better than you or not. And then Tansen said, no, my lord. Well, we cannot command my guru. He is a free bird. We can only approach him and then hope that he sings for us, because he is not somebody who likes authority or authoritative figure. He is a very free bird. And Akbar was already so interested in it. He really wanted to listen to the singing of Swami Haridas Giri. He said, okay, tell me, let us approach him. I really want to listen to that person. And then Tansen said, well, you are a king. If you come as a king with your authority, and obviously he being a free bird, he will quietly disappear. And therefore, Tansen said, my lord, we have to go to him disguised. Of course, I cannot put disguise. He is my guru. He will recognize me whatever disguise I put. But you please don't come as a king. So Akbar said, okay, then how do I come? Well, you dress yourself out as my servant and then come with me. We will go. And then we'll go to the Swami Haridas Giri and then see whether we can hear him singing. So Akbar said, fine, I'm ready to do anything in order to hear his music. So he dressed up as a servant, and then both of them traveled outside of his kingdom, outside of a country. They entered through mountains and rivers, and they went far away. And then finally, Akbar was getting frustrated. I have left my country in search of this guru. Where is he? And this was the time when they just were entering into a jungle. And as they were entering into jungle, suddenly Akbar felt a kind of a refreshing presence in that part of the jungle, as if the flowers have bloomed a little more happily in that area. The trees are a little more joyously moving to the breeze. And he looked around, and then he saw that in one corner there was a rock, and by the side a small rivulet was flowing, and on that rock a bearded figure was just sitting very comfortably with no care or worry on his face, and he was just relaxing. And there was something so attractive, so magnetic in that person. And before even he could ask anything to Tansen, Tansen immediately said, "Oh, there is my Guru, Haridas Giri." And then he rushed and fell at the feet of Swami Haridas Giri. And then Swami Haridas Giri opened his eyes and he said, "Oh, Tansen, my beloved, you have come." And then he looked around and he saw that servant also. And he could immediately see that these two have traveled for long. They are hungry, they need rest. And immediately told Tansen, "Tansen, well, you and the other person, both of you can stay in my hut. It's only a hut for one person. Well, I stay outside, you go rest, and then we will see." So he immediately gave these two people something to eat, and Akbar was so tired that he immediately ate it up. He was feeling so sleepy, and yet he had this desire to hear Swami Haridas Giri singing. So he said, "Probably this person sings in the morning, so let me go to sleep and then I will hear his singing in the morning." So he went to sleep. He woke up in the morning and he saw Swami Haridas Giri still sitting comfortably on that rock, and then he waited. Well, the Swami Haridas Giri finished his morning things and he went here and there. And once again, he came back to his rock and he was happily sitting. And Tansen has particularly told him, please do not ask him to sing, because he doesn't, he is not okay when somebody asks him to sing. We will have to wait for him to sing and then we will see whether it happens or not. But unfortunately, Swami Haridas Giri did not sing the whole day. The next day morning when Akbar woke up, and he woke up with the expectation, probably today I will get to hear, that also did not happen. And the third day Akbar said, "My God, I've left my kingdom, my people, I've come here to hear to this person singing. Does he really know how to sing, or is he even a singer at all? Because he doesn't seem to be singing at all." With frustration, he went to sleep at that night, and suddenly in the middle of the night, something woke him up. He did not know what it was. When he became aware, night, almost probably early, the dawn was about to break up, and in that, when he woke up, he felt that he was surrounded with something like an ocean, like waves going all around, and he could vaguely figure out that these were the musical waves and that were floating around. And suddenly when he felt this musical waves entered into him and then uplifted him so much, and it was too much of an overwhelming feeling for him, because he has never experienced a music that can enter into him and then uplift him, fill him up so much so that it became too much for him. Because to experience an ocean of music enter into that one person filling him up, it was too much, and he just blanked out simply because it was too much for him, and he did not know how much time went by. Suddenly he felt that somebody is shaking him all over with a shouting, "Wake up, Maharaj, wake up, Maharaj." And then he just woke up and he saw Tansen was shaking him up with a lot of worry in his face. And he said, "What happened, Tansen?" He said, Tansen said, "Well, Maharaj, well, you have kind of passed out. I was worried what happened to you." And then Akbar suddenly remembered that ocean of music engulfing him and entering him. He said, no, just move from here. I found myself surrounded with an ocean of music. What was that? And then Tansen said, "Well, that was Swami Haridas Giri singing, and I'm glad that he chose to sing. But I have to tell you something. Let us not think that he did not know who you were. And one look at you, he knew that you are a king, Akbar. You came with that demand to hear the singing, and therefore he waited for that demand to become lesser in intensity, so that you almost, that demand became an expectation, which became a kind of a surrender, that please, if when you feel, give me that experience of music." And when it reached that stage, well, he blessed you with that experience of music. And Then Akbar said, oh, I want to hear something more. And this time I won't pass out. I will take in olive music. But then Tanzin said, no, no. Because he knew that now you will come up with demand, he had left his place and then he has gone wherever he is drawn to. And Akbar was sad, but both of them came back to his kingdom. And then the next day, Akbar called everybody, all his courtiers, and looked at Tanzin and then said, Tanzin, do you remember that particular song that Swami Haridas Giri sang? Did he teach you that? Tanzin said, yes, of course, my lord. And then Akbar said, can you please sing it for us? And then Tanzin said, yes, my lord. And then he starts singing. And when he sings, of course, he sings only as Tanzin could sing. And it was such a wonderful experience for all the courtiers. They've never listened to a song like this. They were all blissed out. And at the end of the song, everybody praised Tanzin that what a wonderful song that you have sung today. And Akbar also praised him that Tanzin, you sang as you alone can sing. But I have one question. Tanzin said, yes, my lord, please ask. You sang in the most phenomenal way, but yet I felt that it is not yet of the caliber of Swami Haridas Giri song. When he sang, it was not yet that caliber. Did he not teach you completely how to do it? And then Tanzin says, well, my lord, there is a difference between his singing and my singing, because I sing at the command of king, that Lord Akbar, you are the king, and therefore I have to sing at your command. He sings only at the command of the King of Kings, the divine. And when the divine feels like expressing itself through him, he breaks out into a song. It is like the breath of the divinity within him. He is so connected with this part deep within his heart that when that part feels like expressing it, well, and when it expresses, that is what you heard in this, when you heard Swami Haridas Giri, and that is the difference, my lord. And this beautiful story, we may have heard about the story, may not have, gives us an idea what it means when we get connected with the soul of India through our soul, and when that soul of India chooses to express itself in the form of art, music, dance, drama, or when it chooses to express itself in and through our mind in the form of the most amazing literature that India has produced, or when it wants to express itself through our life energy, through the million customs and traditions, or even when it chooses to express itself harmoniously through our body, then it becomes a means for harmonizing the energies of the body. Well, we call it as Hatha Yoga. And this, in a nutshell, is the expression of India. And when each one of us can make this connection with the soul of India, then a new possibility and a new way of life emerges in and through India to the entire world. And it is based on this possibility that the mother said this, that the future of India is very clear. What is it? India is guru of the world. In what sense? Well, India will have to show the example of what will happen if we can get connected with our soul, through it with the soul of nation, because there are so many nations in this world and each nation has a soul. And how do the citizens of the nation connect with the best part of their own nation? In and through the soul. And then mother continues, the future structure of the world depends on India. India is the living soul. India is incarnating the spiritual knowledge in this world. And when we do that, a new possibility opens up. What is that new possibility? We are not going to be living our mind based on the imperfect, limited construction of our thoughts and ideas, because at the mental level, well, we are 1.3 billion people, each one following his own logic, his own ideas. we are bound to end up in conflict with each other sooner or later. And if we mainly focus on only expressing ourselves through art and music and dance and drama without getting connected with the soul of India, they will become merely points that will entertain us. In fact, the soap operas that you see, the expression whose idea, whose aim is to just excite us, put you into a state of excitement, and then you start demanding the same excitement with everybody around you, and that is not going to be the thing. But we are going to base our life on a new way because we are going to get connected with an intuitive self, and therefore, to put it in a nutshell, when at least a few of us in India, even a majority of us in India, when we get connected with that, perhaps a new age is going to dawn. And what is that new age? Well, an intuitive way of thinking, not thinking with the mind, but thinking with something deep within the heart, an intuitive way of thinking. What is the nature of intuitive thinking? Well, it immediately connects us with everybody around us. Therefore, every thought that we think will be for the best of everybody. And every problem that we come across, when we find a solution, it will automatically be inclusive, which will automatically be non-gender based. All the modern words that we come across, gender bias and inclusiveness and tolerance, and all this is a natural consequence of us getting in touch with soul, and we already had the signs of how to do it. These are not modern words for us, the inclusiveness or the gender neutrality, or these are actually possibilities in the right sense of the word, and that possibility will happen only when we begin to cultivate that part in us which is naturally intuitive. And therefore, Mother has said, it is by cultivating intuition that one prepares to live for the future. How do we cultivate that intuition? Well, I will leave all of you with that one practice, which if we can put it into, when we look at ourselves, all that we do, we don't feel the effect of the soul because it is so deep within us. How do we get in touch with it? Can we have one simple practice which all of us can put into? Well, in all that we do, there's only one thing that we need to do. We try to be the best that we can be. So, how does it translate into action? When we are thinking of solving a problem, lot of thoughts keep coming to us. We don't accept the very first thought that comes. We wait for the best thought to come. If a thought comes, let us not be satisfied. Let us make an effort to discover a deeper, a vaster, more all-comprehensive thought to appear. And we always catch hold of our thought with that aspiration. So we are not easily satisfied. When we feel an emotion towards the people with whom we are living in our house, an irritation comes, an anger comes, we are not going to be stopping with that emotion only, but we are going to ask ourselves, is this the best emotion that I can come up with in this situation? And something inside will quietly tell you that no, you are better than this. It's not only anger and irritation and jealousy and hatred that we have to, but the quiet voice will tell, and perhaps it will even put us in touch with a vaster, a deeper, a more encompassing emotion. And how do we translate it into our everyday action? When we sit, let us just ask ourselves, is this the best way I can sit? Can I not sit a little better? I can sit like this, I can sit like this, or I can sit with a beautiful poise of the body. When I stand up and walk, can we not ask ourselves, because we may be walking with a lot of drooping, with a lot of disharmonious movements, but is this the best walk that I can? When we pick up an object, and let us ask ourselves, is this the best way of picking up that object? Is there not a more beautiful, gracer way of picking up that object? And in everything that we do, we ask ourselves, is this the best I can do? and a quiet voice will become active, and you will get the answer that no, you can do better. Connect with it. And if we start continuing this practice, gradually we'll find that every day we are able to better our best. The best of my today, I will find in everything that we do, in my thoughts, in my feelings and emotions, in my actions through the body. The best of today, I will find that it is better than the best of my yesterday. And in and through, by trying to be the best in everything that we do, in walking, in writing, in speaking, in calling, in everything that we do, the more we make an effort to be my own better self, that puts us gradually in contact with the best part. And before we know, the nature of our thoughts will change, the nature of our feelings and emotions will change, and even the way the energy flows through the body will change. And at every moment, at every instant, we will find that only the best and the all-inclusive thoughts are finding their way. And at every moment, we find our emotions coming out in an unconditional, unlimited way. And even the energies of our body are so much in tune and rhythm with everything that our actions also will be so beautiful, so graceful, and so harmonious. And this simple practice, that I want to do it better than what I'm doing now. And remember, it is not with a sense of dissatisfaction, but it is with a sense of joy. I have done this, but I can do more by making a little more effort. And in that effort lies true joy. When we make that effort, when we focus our energies, the state that we are in is nothing but a state of joy. I am trying to be the best that I can be. I am trying to draw out the best from within myself. And where am I going to draw it from? With my soul. And when I get connected with it, I am going to get connected with something larger, something vaster, the soul of this nation. And an immense amount of energy and knowledge and wisdom and power and love is going to flow into me, and therefore making me into an ideal citizen of this country. And we can go one step further. We can be citizens of this entire humanity, and as an expression, all that is an expression of that which I carry deep within me. And we will pause here. And if you have any questions, what you have seen is to be a millennial means to open oneself towards the age of this intuition. And opening to this age of intuition means that we have to get connected with that part in us which is naturally intuitive. And by connecting with it, we get connected with our country, the soul of India too. And then we find a new purpose and new meaning for our life as an individual, because we are connected with ourselves, as a citizen of this country, because we are connected with the soul of India. And one more step, well, we can connect it with that power which is behind the entire cosmos, and we will find our unique place in the entire cosmos. So we'll pause. And perhaps we will see if there are any questions that the millennials would have. And as Sri Aurobindo put it, we do not belong to the past dawns. We belong to the noons of the future. And the future age is not going to be based on the power of our thinking, but on the power of our intuitive capabilities. So over to moderators.
Thank you, Shivda. This was like really, really touching. In case any of you have any questions, you can unmute and ask.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Hello, Namaste, Shiv Kumar ji.
Namaste.
I'm Utpala. We have met. Hello.
Yes, please. I've just stopped my screen sharing so that I can take a look at all of you. Yes, Utpala.
Thank you for your guidance. How do we uh, how do we develop intuition?
Well, just as I said, one, our natural way of being is connected with what my mind tells me, what my emotions tell me, and my mind always try to think logically and in a sequential way, one thought, even that too in a very confused way. And I had actually kept an activity for you to understand the nature of our mind, because to tell you frankly, the mind is not exactly in our control. Any thought can pop into our mind anytime, and this is the condition of our mind. The thoughts are not yet in our control. And if we are living in our mind, and when we want to connect to intuition which belongs to another place, let us just say we are living in a country, we want to go to another country. How do we go to that country? Well, first we have to leave the country we live in and then go to another country. In the same way, we have to leave the thinking mind and make it quieter so that we can glimpse at that intuitive mind which is beyond this mind. So how do we connect to the intuitive part of the mind? It is only by making the mind little quieter, little calmer, and for which the everyday meditation of keeping the mind silent even for a few minutes and will actually help us, so that whenever we want to have an intuitive thought, we have a problem and we are breaking our head to find a solution. It could be any problem which we encounter every day, not able to find a problem. What do we find? Well, we are living in our mind. We quieten our mind, and then we wait. Once we quieten our mind and we turn ourselves upward with an expectation of, I've quietened something now. Now, if a thought has to come, it is not going to come in a confused way, and it has to come from that other country, the country of intuition. So when we quieten our mind and turn it and upward in anticipation, something of a drop comes and then falls into our head, and that is the flash of intuition. And suddenly we light up, oh, why didn't I think of this beforehand? And then we open up. Even it could happen anytime. You want to express yourself artistically, so you pick up your brushes and colors, everything there. Now the question comes, what am I supposed to draw? You quieten your emotions and then turn it inward and wait, and then suddenly one drop of inspiration comes. It is almost a splash of colors appears in front of your heart's eye, and then you know what you are supposed to express in this one. Or you want to write a poetry. Well, all the poets will tell you this is more easier to comprehend. I don't know if any poets are there among the people, because every time somebody writes a beautiful poetry, they will always say the poetry came to me. Where did it come from? Are you not the one who wrote the poetry? If it came, where did it come from? Well, when a poet becomes really calm and quiet in that intensity, he has only one expectation, that may a beautiful poetry happen to me, and then one line floats and then comes into our mind, and without disturbing that quietude, we train ourselves to note it down, and then a next line comes, and sometimes the third line comes first and the first line will come later. It doesn't matter. In that calmness, you note it down and then you look at it. In that same quietness, if you feel like changing something, you go ahead and change. And then what you're looking at is one of the most phenomenal poetry, or one of the most phenomenal drawings that you have made, or one of the most phenomenal solutions that you found. I'm hoping, if at all we have to tackle with this corona, I don't think the ideas coming from our mind is not sufficient. We will have to turn it within, and we will have to wait for solutions which not only consider the physical circumstances, but even the circumstances of our inner personalities. What are the things that our inner personality is susceptible to? Because for all accounts, this corona is not dependent only on physical things. The way I'm getting the reports, physically, even if you cover yourself up completely, still The doctors who have been walking in almost like a hazmat wala suit, well, they got it. How did it enter into them? We will have to open up to dimensions which are beyond mere physicality, and we have to enter into the dimensions of our emotions, our thoughts, and see something is there not okay, which is catching a subtler form of this virus, and perhaps we could end up with a nice solution for the coronavirus. So this is how we develop intuition. We silence, we quieten what is normal to us, and the direction is important. We turn inwards or we turn upwards, because if we start looking around, 1,000 thoughts and emotions will come. So once we are quiet, we turn inward or upward, and then we open up to this intuitive self inside, or the intuitive thoughts which are coming from above.
Thank you so much. I mean, the experience was, it used to occur, or it was occurring sometimes, and then we used to tell, I had some intuition that ye hone wala hai, and ye hua, but to be consciously, doing whatever we do, that is what we.
Actually, all of us get the gut feeling, but none of us know the science behind it. None of us know that there is a process to it, and this process has already been discovered, and a lot of people are practicing it. In fact, this turning towards this deeper dimension, you can even, let us not think that only people with the longer beard and so-called spiritual people can get intuitive. From our modern people, I can share with you a couple of examples, and then you will be wonderstruck as, oh, these are the people who are not like Swamijis and then bearded fellows. They are also talking about the same type of getting connected with that intuitive self. So I'm going to show to you one person. You have heard of A.R. Rahman? Well, this was what he has expressed to one of the interviews. And I'm going to show you a clip of 1 minute where he was asked at some point, you are composing music, who do you compose it for? Do you compose it for money or for pleasing people? And this is what he expressed. So I'm going to share my screen with you. And let's watch. This. Yes.
So I love you, அவர் சொல்வாரா நீங்க சொல்வீங்களா?
He only believes in saying I love you to God.
So the background is there is an interviewer on the left side, Suhasini, and this is A.R. Rahman, and A.R. Rahman's wife is at the center. So the interviewer is asking, has A.R. Rahman ever told you, I love you, my wife? And then the wife replies, that is in English, so you can understand.
So I love you, அவர் சொல்வாரா நீங்க சொல்வீங்களா?
He only believes in saying I love you to God.
A wife telling, may or may not, he only believes in saying, I love you, God. Now, interesting, and this is what Rahman has to respond to.
Okay.
What I'm grateful is, in a family of faith, the most important thing is faith, and that controls in a good way, So we forgive each other for the sake of God. We love each other for the sake of God. And then we do everything for the sake of God. So the purpose is a higher ideal and not just, So we are together for the sake of God. We pray for the sake of God. That's a beautiful thing. And I do music for the sake of God, to make people happy, and everybody is a part of it.
Okay.
Just imagine, what is A.R. Rahman? I do music for the sake of God. And how does he do it? Well, if you go and ask him, he will explain the process of going deep within and then connecting to the source of music. Well, how Tanzain's Guruji connected with the music, the process is same. And then we can see it in some of the people who have achieved. I have only showed you Rahman's case because he is popular and you can relate to it. But I would like to show to some of the youngsters another person who is again popular and immensely talented. And then you are asking, where does this talent come from? And the secret is revealed. And so the next one is, I'm going to show from interview from Shreya Ghoshal. Everybody knows Shreya Ghoshal? Of course, who doesn't? And this is what she has to. So it's an interesting conversation. And again, it is only 1.5 minutes. And the context is, the interviewer is asking, is there a difference when you sing in front of 1,000 people and when you sing inside the studio? Now, that is what is going to, and this is what Shreya Ghoshal replied. And listen to it very carefully so that you try to get the gist of it.
That's all. I mean,
What do you
fun.
prefer?
So that's all. I mean,
What do you
fun.
prefer? Playback singing or concerts?
Oh, they are two completely different things, and I love both. Must say, live concerts, it is a different high. Lights इतनी होती हैं कि आपको audience पूरी तरह से दिखती नहीं है. But you can hear them. You know the energy of that audience. You know where I have to do what. I did my first concert probably when after Devda's release. That was years back. Since then, every concert has been a learning experience. And over the time, I've really understood how to read the minds of each and every person who's sitting there. It's fun. It's
Just imagine what she is saying. We have already heard it somewhere. She is able to connect with the minds of all the people and understand the state of them. And do you recall now the quotation that we saw? It is one of the experiences when we are deeply connected with ourselves. And then when we stand in front of an audience of even 1,000 people, we can get connected to their minds and understand what thrills them, what pulsates them, and come up with the performance accordingly. And this is what, well, if she does this to an audience, what does she do when she is alone with herself inside the studio?
almost like an art. And when it comes to recording, it's I think it's a very spiritual experience. What I do in the studio, creating something out of nothing. That creation itself, it feels like you're giving birth to a baby. It's almost like that. So it's a very spiritual experience.
Well, I just wanted to share with you because there are people who are not Swamijis with the long beard sitting in the ashram who are preparing themselves to this dimension of intuition. There are quite a lot of people who can get connected to this intuitive part within themselves and allow it to express. And when they allow it to express, if you think, your thoughts become something luminous and brilliant. And if you express it in the form of art, music, dance, drama, 100 times its quality increases suddenly because it is coming from there. And if you allow it to flow in your office spaces and the 100 problems that you encounter there, the solutions that you are looking for, it begins to flow through. Even physically, the energies that you feel will be so harmonious, so much in tune that you will always be left with an abundant amount of energy when you enter into this world, and you will not be influenced or overpowered by anything in this world. Well, what I have showed you is just two glimpses of the more popular people, but in and behind them, there is something which is waking up in India, and this is the intuitive way of drawing out things from oneself and through which connecting to the soul of India. So do we have any more questions?
Yes, Shivda, we have a question.
Yes.
It's from Jantika Basu from Facebook, who asked that when I want to do something, it does not come out as I like to do. This makes me a little disappointed. So how can I resolve it?
Well, interesting. The very fact that I wanted to be in a certain way, we had to be sure that where this I is located when we want something to happen in the way. So there is always a limitation of us whenever we view a problem or when we are looking to execute a thing from an I point of view, which is a normal I. When I say normal I, well, it is a combination of, well, my physicality, my specific bundle of emotions. So this much of emotion, this is Shivakumar's. And this much of way of thinking only is Shivakumar's. We have to go beyond this limited thoughts capacity, limited emotional capacity, and limited bodily capacity. And when we step back into that unlimited, vast part of ourselves, then that part has automatically has the capacity to effectuate the thoughts which are of a different nature, the ideas which are of a different nature, and it not only gives the idea, but it also gives the capacity to execute that idea, which most often we cannot. Sometimes you may have a brilliant idea and then you share it with 10 people, hardly anybody agrees with you, and then everybody wants to do it in their own way, and you find that such an idea, but nobody is willing to accept it. Why? Because you do not have the power of expression which makes that idea so irresistible. You are not yet in possession of an emotion which is so irresistible in its nature that anybody who comes across it, they are awed by it. It's almost like inside them a flash of lightning happens when thoughts, ideas and action come from that space. And this is the only way of effectually translating into action what we conceive as an idea or as a feeling. There is no other way, because any other way will be imperfect, it will be rejected by people, and sometimes our own thoughts and emotions will play the devil's advocate and then will not allow us to realize our ideas or our plans.
Thank you, Shivda, for that. So Harsh will be asking the next question himself. So Harsh, could you please unmute yourself?
Thank you, Shivda, for this beautiful insights. And शिवदा एक क्वेश्चन है, मेरी माँ भगवत गीता देखती है एंड मैं भी उस टाइम पे देख रहा था, तो उसमें बोलते हैं कि भक्ति से जुड़ो, भगवान की पूजा करो, ये सब करो. फिर एक दिमाग में क्वेश्चन आया कि जब हम भक्ति से अगर जुड़ते हैं तो हमारा क्या रोल रहेगा, हम फिर क्या काम करेंगे, बिकॉज इन टुडेज टाइम वी हैव टू सस्टेन आवरसेल्फ एंड उसको कैसे करेंगे. सो व्हाट्स द ट्रूथ ऑफ लाइफ, व्हाट्स द पर्पस ऑफ लाइफ? Is it like we grow up and study, then do a job, then for marriage, child, and then we get old and then we go for a death? So how to identify this?
So we have two ideas. One is to go through the same cycle. Are we doing anything different from the billions of people who have come before us? We are born, educated, got a job, married, reproduced, enhanced our family, and then old age, we lost everything, we died, and we have to leave everything. Are we doing anything different? Well, only a little flavor is different, but it is the same. Other thing this Gita is saying, and unfortunately we are not introduced to the Gita in the right way. We think that bhakti means having somebody in front of you and then pour yourself to that one person. Just imagine, even as a human being, if somebody comes and sits in front of you and then picks up and then starts throwing things at you, maybe lots of flowers, or saying things to you in 1,001 names of Harshavardhan, by the time we reach third or fourth name, you have a tendency to say, "Arey Arey Baba, let's do something." So this mistaken idea that bhakti means we have to have somebody and then we have to go all out on them is a distorted idea of what bhakti means. Bhakti means refining our emotions. And when we say, or when in Gita says that you have to turn it towards me, it doesn't mean that towards one person, but towards the best part within ourselves, our soul. Remember the previous one, we spoke about Krishna. If we look upon a God to whom we have bhakti as somebody who is sitting in Kailash or in Vrindavan, well, that which is within will have to put on the makeup and then come. But if we look at everything around us as an expression of that divinity, then what does bhakti mean? Bhakti means refining our emotions, all the emotions, not only the puja mentality, all the emotions, which means that happiness and sadness and jealousy and hatred and love and compassion, all that we have, turning it inwards so that they can shed off their limitation. So that that feeling that I have, the emotion that I have, when it comes out in an unlimited, unconditional way, be it love, be it compassion, be it a kind of an helping mentality, living, helping, seeing the happiness in other people, when it comes out in such a different way. Bhakti yoga is not sitting in front of one person and then constantly going after that person, but it is actually a turning towards the source of entire creation, and then everything that we do could be an expression of bhakti. You pick up a pen, and if you feel that that presence to whom you have bhakti is equally there in the pen too, then the nature of relationship of you with a pen that you pick up, or a paper that you set in front of you, or a flower vase that you arrange will be totally different. It will be a different type of connection. It is connecting with everything through our emotions is what is truly bhakti. There, our natural way of connecting with is, it lands us into problem. Well, you try connecting yourself, you go all out with at least a few people around you. Let us say you have, I don't know whether you have siblings, you have father, mother, you have girlfriends, you have friends. Let's take the case of friends. To turn all your attention towards one friend and then pour yourself toward that person with an unlimited love and affection, immediately the next two will come and start complaining, oh, sirf usse hi ho sakta hai, hum log kya hai? Why only with that person? And then after some time the complaints will come. You spending so much time with that person, not with me. You purchase nice thing that person, and then you get entangled yourself, and after some time you will be, I think, plucking off your hair if you attempt to love in a normal human emotional way. But if you become love yourself, if you cannot but be an expression of love, it is like a flower. When it blooms, it is not going to say that I am going to give my fragrance only to Harshavardhan, but not to Raghav. It doesn't. It's nature to make its fragrance and beauty available in an irresistible way is its own nature. And therefore, when we say bhakti, it is connecting with everything around us through a refined emotion from such a depth that people will find it hard to resist you. And also, when we make that happen, it has the capacity to change the people so that they can be the best that they can be. That is another beautiful thing. When love comes from that source, because it's coming from the depth, it immediately goes and connects itself and activates the depth of the other person. And after some time, he will feel, oh, I also wish to return something of that love, so that inside that person, that part which has an unlimited way of loving, connecting with other self, other people also awakens. And not only that, he will also start getting different thoughts. His thoughts will be molded once your love reaches out to him and wakes up the sleeping giant inside everybody else. Once you have woken up the giant inside, it's not going to say, once you convert that spark inside you into a fire, it is a forest fire. Anybody who comes into contact with you also catches that fire. They themselves become in their own flames and fires. So this is the nature of that intuitive approach. And we have Bhakti Yoga, where there are so many ways of connecting. Somebody who is very mental, who have the habit of thinking about and refining his ideas, he also can, through that, get connected to this part within. Well, in that case, we call it as Jnana Yoga. Somebody in whom thoughts are very alive. He cannot pay too much attention because this is the main part. Through that, he can reach out to that which is behind the thoughts, get connected, and then when he starts thinking, his thoughts will be so very different. Well, we call that as Jnana Yoga. When we turn our emotions towards that, open and refine ourselves, make our emotions unlimited, and then express it, it becomes actually the Bhakti Yoga. And then our life energies, when we attach it to that source, which has got infinite strength and power, allow it to express itself in everyday transaction, well, it becomes Karma Yoga. But all this is too much. I'm a very simple, Siddha Sada person. I know my body, I eat, I sleep. Well, body is my most important thing. Don't worry. in India, there is a way for you also. It's called Hatha Yoga, where you begin with the energies of your body, align it, and through it, you approach the deeper dimensions of yourself. And Swami Vivekananda calls the deeper dimension of the Hatha Yoga as Raja Yoga. In fact, the moment we say yoga, all that we think of is only Hatha Yoga, the practices that we do with our body, but the deeper part of it actually connects us to the deeper dimensions and opens us to the deepest reality and the deepest possibilities. Yoga means nothing but connecting ourselves to that intuitive self. And therefore, it is Hatha Yoga, Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, or Bhakti Yoga. These are all different ways, because we don't want to leave out anybody in this country who can come up with an excuse. Oh, I'm emotionally not that emotional guy. Well, if you're mentally good, you take up that. Well, I'm not mentally good. I'm a corporate guy. My energies are there. Well, take up Karma Yoga. Well, I'm body-based person. Start with Hatha Yoga and take up Raja Yoga. So these are innumerable ways in which every one of us can be included in this path. I think we are 9:40. Are there questions left, or?
Thank you, Shivda, for this beautiful insight. Thank you so much.
Hello.
Yes.
I have a question.
Yes.
So my question is that we know many things into our knowledge, like junk food is unhealthy and we have to not have, and many such things. But when it comes, we are further attracted to it when we see them. And so how to get rid of that? Like, our knowledge knows that some things are bad.
Well, it is interesting. In the modern days, of course, I know so many foodies, and we cannot tell them give up junk food, because what to do? They feel so tasty, isn't it? Unfortunately, the healthy foods don't taste as good as junky food. So whose is the fault? It is the fault of the people who make the healthy food. Why can't they make it tastier also? And when we can do that, we are not here to give up taste with the idea, because what do the junk foods depend on? They depend on this area. If you put one, what is that called, lay chips, and it goes inside, you can hardly resist putting the next one inside, and then next one inside, and then goes, because you're only aware of this one. And taste is important, because taste is part of our experience of life, and it's a wonderful thing. Only thing, taste alone is not what we should focus. We have to activate and become aware in other parts also, so that the other parts that seek for energy, nutritional content, or the energies which is put into the food by the people who make it, or the energies that go into the food by the environment in which we eat, if we develop the sensitiveness towards all these, then we prepare food in such a way that it is not only tasty, but nutritional as well. And we need to enter into that area. I already know some of the youngsters are already experimenting, and taste is not which is something to be given up. In fact, it is only one dimension. More needs to be added. Is it not important that it should have nutritional content? Yes. Is it not important that it is cooked by somebody who has love? Well, you go to KYC, and I don't know, what is it called? KYC? That, whatever.
I don't know.
You go to that place where, KFC, yes. And I'm not singling out only KFC, but you go to a place where the intention of the person who cooks is to just make you eat more and get more money out. Then that intention goes into the food, and you feel so good here, but after it has gone inside, that intention is going to mess up with your system. And therefore, is it not important to see that a person who has a little goodwill for us cooks, and then we get it from a good source? Important. Is it not good that the food that we eat also looks appealing and beautiful? Why are we putting the toppings and other things? So that it appeals to the eye also. Is it not the food that we cook should appeal to our nose, smell? Of course. You take the topic of food, there are so many things through which we can make it an enriching experience for us, but we have to go and enter into the deeper dimension. It is said that the food, first thing, traditionally it is said, it should please your eyes, because you can spot it from a kilometer away. It should feel appealing. So it should be beautiful, look harmonious, lots of nice toppings. Once it comes closer, it should satisfy your smell. It's not that you have to close your nose in order to eat. And as it comes near, it should be very open to your touch also, neither too hot, not too harsh, and it should be something which should be good for touch also. And then finally, it should be tastier. As it goes inside, it should be okay for your entire system, nutritional wise and other dimensions also. So all this come into play. So don't give up tasting things, but choose things that have more than taste. And it is high time we did it.
Yeah. Thank you. I just want to say something. It's not only up to food. Like, it's for me, like, good and bad. Like, if you think, if you take the t-shirt I'm wearing, it has lots of dyes which goes into it, and it in return pollutes the river. Like, the people who make do this, they pollute the nature. Like, everything we could separate it as good and bad. Yeah.
Hold on, Sandhya Venkatesan. Now, this is where the human mind comes in, because 100 people will be saying good, another 100 people will be seeing the same thing as bad. And that is how there'll be researchers going on where 100 scientists are proving that this is good for your health, and another 100 people will be saying with equal amount of research that this is bad. How are you going to listen and decide whether the t-shirt you are using has the dyes which are harmful for you? Because 100 people with equal vehemence say that it is good. We have a latest modern dye which is supposed to make you, and then another 100 people, the ecologically aware people, will say that no, this is not so. How are you going to? And this is the trap that we might fall into. We cannot only base ourselves on what people say, even if it is a scientist. Take the corona case. Well, does it spread through? How does it spread? Well, so many Harvard scientists say that WHO, what it has said is it can spread in an asymptomatic way. They are not agreeable to it. And what they say, WHO got its own way of saying. We have different conflicting opinion from the so-called experts themselves, and therefore we cannot leave everything to them to decide. It is time in this age and in the coming age, each one of us develop the capacity to feel these things for oneself. When you put on the shirt, if you have developed your awareness to such an extent that you can find something beautiful enveloping you, even without knowing the technology, the chemical composition, and the process, through an intuitive sense, you can find that something in you is rejecting. And even dogs and other animals do it. Give a dog something which is likely to upset its stomach. Well, most of the time, it will not take anything which is harmful to it. It has that sense. But it is mostly instinct. You ask a dog, how did you know it is not okay for you? Or when a dog by chance eats something and it's some stomach digestion, it knows which particular plant leaf it has to go. It will eat it, and once you eat it, it will vomit out the indigested food and it will feel happy. And how did it know? Well, it did not read the newspaper of the scientists, which scientist has said what food it has to eat. It has an instinctive sense. But if you ask a dog, it cannot say, because it is an instinct. We, human beings, can develop a sense, an intuitive sense. And right now, unfortunately, the way people advertise things, they can convince you that black is white and white is black. How is white black? White has all the colors, and therefore black is also part of it. So technically, you look at white, you are looking at black. That's it. Now that is the limitation of the mental approach. And right now, we are at the peak of things which are belonging to a limited way of looking at things. We have to break out of it. And it is high time that we did it, and we cannot do it based on somebody's definition of what is good and what is bad. And sometimes what is good for you may be bad for another person.
Yes.
And therefore, it is up to us. We are standing at an age where finally we have to take initiative and we have to feel responsible. Is it a big task? Is it a worthy task? Of course, if this is not worth it, what else is worth it? Getting connected with it, developing that capacity to know what is good and what is bad by ourselves through an intuitive perception is the need of the hour. And when we are able to do it, well, we would have entered into the age of intuition.
Yes. Thank you.
So thank you, Shivda, for such a beautiful explanation. Since
Right. And yes, everybody else, those who are in a hurry to finish their lunch, please go ahead. And only some who have a burning question, well, you can switch off your camera and then start eating, or you can continue asking questions.
Kumar, may I?
Sure.
If
Utpala, you have already asked a question, so let me see whether somebody else has asked a question. If nobody, then we can come back to you. Any more questions, Raghav?
Not from our end. Like if anybody wants to ask.
So we can take Utpala's question, and probably that could be the last one because we are already approaching 10 o'clock. I'm so happy that some of you are so thirsty for this because this approach and this knowledge is not to be had through our school education, nor easily available over internet, which is a storehouse of everything. And finally, I mean, before we fall for anything, I mean, let us fall in before we fall for anything outside, and then probably the outside falling will not even happen. Yes, Utpalaji, go ahead.
It's only if time permits, Shivkumar.
Surely, let's keep it as a last question.
Okay, it's just a comment that as far as the developing intuitive faculty is concerned, I think it will be of great use if we develop this kind of faculties in children, right from the age when they understand, or probably even from when the child is in the womb.
I think, Utpalaji, you have hit it at the thing. If we are talking about the next generation, the future of India, the people who will become future of India, we need to revamp our education inside out and bring in the elements which actually include this intuitive approach. And let me also tell you that children are naturally intuitive. It is the wrong type of education which makes them turn outside and makes them believe in only what they can see and hear and then feel, forgetting that within them is an immense capacity of expressing themselves and developing a lot of faculties, and one of them is intuitive faculty. We really need to revamp our system of education. So Purandar has said that he has typed out some question. I don't know whether it is there anywhere. If Raghav can read it out.
Yes, yeah, we can take that as the last question. So
surely.
So the question is this intuitiveness is it a part of the subconscious?
Well, Western psychology puts everything that we are not aware of into the subconscious. So even some superb capacities, like when somebody hypnotizes you, then you will get capacities that I can ask you to put your finger into the fire and tell that you are not going to be burnt, and you will not be burnt. In fact, I can make you stiff like a log and then put immense amount of weight onto you without making you break if you are put under hypnosis and if I give a suggestion that you are very strong. Now, we have to understand something, and in Indian yoga is especially critical and bang on target about identifying the source which is beyond us as two. And they are poles apart in their effect and result. One is what we call as a subconscious. Everything that we have experienced so far as humanity over the several millions of years, after we have experienced, for example, a thought comes, after it has been thought out, what happens to the thought? It sinks down. we have an emotion. It may be a love or nafrat or hatred or jealousy or all the million, little emotion. After we have experienced, where does it go? Well, it gets imprinted. And all my body illnesses, aches and tendencies and desires, after I have experienced, where does it go? It sinks down. Where does it sink down? Into a subconscious part, into a part below us. And the part below us is an immense ocean because it contains everything that we have thought, felt, sensed, experienced in our body. Everything is gone. It is an immense ocean, so much so that if we open ourselves to it, we will become mere puppets, like corks tossed in powerful currents of ocean. How does it function? Let us say there is some violence breaks out in the neighborhood. Like in so many times when untoward incidences happen, violence breaks out. If I am open to my subconscious, those violent vibrations which have happened very close to me, they also sink into the subconscious, and all of us have one single amorphous subconscious that violence can very well enter into me. And even if I am normally a sadhu bacha, when violence happens, I will suddenly find that there are violent tendencies manifesting in me, which means that I am opening to them in a subconscious way. Even if I'm not physically connected, those vibrations can enter into us from below because we have no control over the subconscious at all. And that is one source. And hypnotism, with somebody's supervising power, puts us in touch with one or two parts of the subconscious, is extremely dangerous process unless the hypnotist is so master of his own subconscious. Anytime, any thought or emotion can overpower us. And therefore, we have to turn towards another source which is also beyond my present capacity, and that source is deep within. And only thing, we are all of us connected all the time to the subconscious, so that all the desires that come to us, the crazy ideas that suddenly pop out of us, where do they come from? Where they come from subconscious. But to this another source which is deep within us, there is a door. There is something which is blocking, and therefore we are not naturally able to connect to that source, and that source is superior to our anything that we can think of in terms of our thinking capacity, feeling capacity, our faculties. It is so superior that we can only call it as a super conscious. And in fact, the origin of everything that we see is the super conscious trying to express itself. Only when it is caught by our limited mind and limited emotions, it undergoes a distortion, and then it results in all the negative things that we see around, which forms bulk of human experience. If you look at the entire human experience and how many things which are most beautiful, most extraordinarily powerful, moving, how many best literature, best art, best music, they are much less in compared to the downward pulling tendencies and things. That is simply because we are naturally connected to the subconscious. Sub means inferior, and not so much naturally connected to something superior to the superconscious. So both are now not under our direct vision, and therefore we are likely to mistake one for another. Sometimes a violent and powerful emotion will overpower us. Let us not think that it is coming from something divine, something superior, from the superconscious part, because that violent power overpowers us, and the result of that violence is nothing but sadness and negative results. And therefore, there is another source in us which is super conscious, and that the way to connect with the super conscious is through the heart, through the depth of the heart, and this will connect us, and it is the only safe way to connect to anything that is superior, anything that is futuristic, anything that is more beautiful. In fact, everything that is good in this world has come because that superconscious was touched by us momentarily. And what is the result? The best literature, best art, best music, best dance, best of everything is only because some people touched that superconscious, and such beautiful things happened in this world. And the superconscious has not exhausted itself. There is an immense more amount of beauty, love, joy, power, strength, harmony is waiting to express. What has got expressed so far in the history of humanity is nothing, negligible compared to what lies to be expressed. And with that note, we will conclude our quite long session. We have only 2 minutes left, and already our team has shared with you the feedback form. If you have, over to you, Raghav, conclude.
Yeah, so I'll quickly hand it over to Palak now.
Thank you, everyone. I don't have much to say after such an enriching session. I think all of us are just overwhelmed and really full of joy and a lot of positive hope through what Shivda, you have shared. Something as simple as connecting to India's soul and the very being of what India is. I think that in itself is a very fresh perspective that a lot of us are really not aware of, not very conscious of. So this is something that really, for me, it really touched me, and I'm feeling really happy, overjoyed. And as we were reading the comments also, that is what most of us are feeling right now. One of the important things that you mentioned about India, infinity in finite things, and then instant connection with the stone, and then identifying the spark that is present within a stone itself. I mean, these are certain things that are so subtle and yet so powerful. So thank you so much for such an amazing session. It was really heartwarming. And gratitude to all the participants who could join us in this very beautiful journey. And so we will continue with these explorations over the coming weekends as we move ahead. And quickly I'll share the poster of our next session, which will be on Marriage and Inner Progress by Lakshmi Jyoti. We'll see you again at 8 p.m. next Sunday.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.